Hello, everyone. The decade of action is here. Our aim is to change the global conversation and find agreement on what needs to be solved. Today, starting with climate change, we want to shift our focus to what is working. We have three very special guests with us. Sean O'Sullivan, Managing Director and Partner at SOSV. SOSV manages 800 million with a portfolio of over 1,000 deep tech startups that have combined valuation of over $15 billion. It is the second most active VC globally in 2020. Sean is an entrepreneur and investor, creating and supporting a range of business, humanitarian, educational endeavors. He is a major promoter of economic and social development and is the primary funder of Khan Academy and Coder Dojo. Today, Sean leads SOSV and its staff of 110 plus people with kindness, compassion, and big vision. Thank you so much for being here today, Sean.
Thank you. And I should just correct, I'm not the primary funder. I was an initial sort of foundational funder of those organizations, but they've been funded by many, many others since I helped them get rolling, but thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Lisa Kurbiel, Head of Secretariat at UN's Joint SDG Fund. The Joint SDG Fund manages over 250 million and to date has funded 97 joint programs focused on integrated social protection or SDG finance. It has stimulated over 600 partnerships working together alongside the UN to support the SDGs, and it has tested over 100 innovative solutions to accelerate the 2030 agenda. Lisa is an attorney who has worked for the development of human rights policies, legislative reform, programming strategies, and advocacy campaigns within the United Nations system for the last 18 years. She's developed and implemented policy and communications initiatives around the world and joined UNICEF Kenya as their Chief of Communications, Advocacy, and Partnerships in 2017. Lisa is all heart and laser focused on impact. Thank you so much for being here.
It's really a pleasure, Maya. Thank you so much.
And lastly, we have Arvind Gupta, who's partner at Mayfield Fund. He's founder and venture advisor at IndieBio. Mayfield Fund is a global venture firm with $2.5 billion under management. The firm has been championing people for over 50 years and has invested in more than 500 companies, resulting in 117 IPOs and more than 200 mergers and acquisitions. At Mayfield, Arvind leads its engineering biology practice. He is a venture advisor at IndieBio, where he founded the world's first life science accelerator as part of SOSV and redefined the pace and possibilities of early stage biotech to impact human and planetary health. He is the author of Decoding the World, published by Hachette Books. And Arvind is an incredible dad who has devoted his life to building a sustainable future for his kids. Thank you so much for being here, Arvind.
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate it. And I appreciate being in the same Zoom room with Sean and Lisa. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So as you can see, we have three powerhouses with us today, people who are moving resources in a very extraordinary manner, and hopefully today's conversation will uplift you and inspire you. So we'll start with the first question, which is, what is your fund's approach to creating companies with climate tech solutions? Any one of you can start.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. So the Joint SDG Fund was created within the United Nations to really take Wall Street's growing interest in ESG to developing countries. So when we talk about our climate investments, it's about taking public monies that were given through the UN from governments and helping be the buffer or the de-risk or the first loss for those investments in emerging or frontier markets that might not be on the radar of some of my other esteemed panelists. It's not easy to begin in green energy in the first place, but it could be even more difficult to do so in a Rwanda, in a Sudan, or in a Colombia. So the UN, being present on the ground, is there to really become the first to take the feasibility study, the first to engage government, the first to look at the legislative framework, and basically try to pave the way for investors to change the game. So that could be any number of kinds of tools, which I'm sure we can discuss later.
Amazing. Sean.
As at SOSV, we run accelerators, and so we're the first, in a different way than Lisa. We're the first professional investor to back a startup. Often it's just a couple of founders, a prototype, or a well-developed capability that's been proven out somewhat in the labs. And then we'll take the jump, put in the first $250,000 into primarily in the climate tech solutions. It generally runs into either our IndieBio or HACS accelerators. And then we build a team around that company and try to de-risk the company for later stage investors that will co-invest alongside with. Our first check is for $250,000 as part of the accelerator, but then we'll co-invest alongside investors up to Series A round, typically up to $1.5 million per round after that, up to that there.
And Arvind at Mayfield.
Yeah, so really, at Mayfield, our approach has been developed by the experiences built at IndieBio. And that experience really is to fight the effects of industrial capitalism with a better capitalism. And that better capitalism is developing products through new technologies like biology that are just better for people and better for the planet. And so therefore, just by people wanting to buy a product that's better for them and is affordable, in delivering that, you could still save the planet. And we can't change the social system we're in, but we could work within it to create goods and services that really do help people create a better future. And so, all the food investments we did at IndieBio is a great example of that, where millennials and Gen Z are truly worried about what they can do. And they were realizing they could change the way they eat. They're realizing they could change what they wear. So the fashion industry is the next one to get disrupted. And we're already seeing that with companies like MycoWorks and making leather without the cow. So truly the mechanism of capitalism, I think, is the best way to disrupt the capitalism that got us here.
Mm. And what got you into this type of investment? What was the underlying motivation that makes you invest in this area? Let's start with Sean.
Well, I've always sort of been an efficiency nut. I'm an engineer by training, and I went into engineering because the wastefulness of the world has always bothered me. I'm the guy who, when I'm at an airport and I see people queuing up in a strange way, or you can't get through, I'll be rearranging the pylons so people can actually sort into that, and so create a little order where the chaos is. So that's always been an underlying motivation for me. And technology is really, it's geared towards creating abundance, right? And abundance in some way also unfortunately causes us to have increased consumption. So actually, when we're trying to create a world which is a fairer and more equitable place, abundance is a good thing because it means that more of us can participate in society. Abundance democratizes, the quality of life of people. Because once things become affordable, once things become at scale. Arvind, is that you? Can you turn on muting on your?
I've tried a million times. I don't.
Have you upgraded to you can go with the notifications?
Try logging out.
I'll show you how to do it later.
Do not disturb. It's on. It's on. Do not disturb.
Do not disturb is on?
It's on.
No. Oh,
Okay.
no, it should be working.
You might
Sorry,
have to
guys.
log out.
No, it's, well,
I
anyway.
didn't mean to distract you.
Sorry. Back to the, what was I
Abundance.
saying?
Abundance.
And democratizing the quality of life, abundance does that because it means that we can have enough food. I mean, it was a technology that allowed farming to be able to produce enough food that unfortunately we're consuming it and making our society incredibly sick through our obesity and through all the problems that come from that. So, technology is part of the problem, but it also is the only way you can get to a solution. We have to fight the previous, as Arvind was saying, you have to fight the previous excesses of technology to come up with more efficient technology so we can have a sustainable future. And so, that's in terms of my motivation. We have a very broad remit at SOSV across hardware and all of life sciences. And so we can shape the future of industry through helping take these ideas to real working de-risked prototypes that can then get funded at the later stage. And that's what motivates the 120 people that work at SOSV every day to get up and hit the floor, because it's a miraculous thing to take something which seemed impossible, make it inevitable, to take a founder from an idea to a real company, a funded, a team, a business that's investable, is selling products and helping improve the world in that way. I mean, that's my motivation. So thank you for asking.
And Arvind, what type of what's your underlying motivation that makes you invest in this area, and what got you into this?
I mean, it's really to help create things that make the world better than we found it. And I know it sounds trite, but truly it's also for my kids and for everyone's children. And that is a fundamental motivator. I mean, like, I get to wake up and see them every day, 3 and 5, these artists back there. And really, like, that's it. And then you go out and you see millennials and Gen Z that are, an entire generation feeling disenfranchised by their elders because of the things they've done, and really being able to help them and help everyone have a better planet and have better health. I mean, that's something that addresses my parents and my children and everyone's parents and everyone's children. So, in the time that I have on this planet, and the only thing I have is time, right? Where do I want to spend the time? That seems like a great place for me to put my energy and my time.
Thank you. I also like the motto that your family lives by, which is create more than you consume.
That's
and
right.
So Lisa, what got you into this type of investment, and what's your motivation?
Yeah, thanks, Maya. And it's so wonderful to share a panel with, fellow dreamers in a way, dreaming of a world that could be. The UN, as you know, created 75 years ago after World War II to ensure we would never ever have the suffering and the horrors of what so many went through, and so many who were lost. And I think, you look ahead to the next 75 years and the challenges that will be faced by our children, as well as those that come after them. It's really to equalize the game, and I've had the honor of serving in Somalia, South Sudan, Mozambique, Kenya. I've really had the privilege to serve with the UN in countries where the cards are not dealt fairly to anyone. And so the ability to even achieve the most basic human rights is really limited. So the fund is trying to look at the hard facts of what investors need, right? Investors need a return for their clients. Investors need a product that will, be useful. And more investors want a product that is also sustainable and doing good, right? So what we're trying to do now is really tap into the incredible innovations coming out of the developing world, which are often unseen by nature of where they are. And we're just trying to shorten that distance and try to make it more considerable to consider a project that is in another continent and another time zone with another language and another perspective, but could be equally, if not more, powerful in terms of impacts on the planet, right? So you look at, the Congo and the forest across Western Africa, that forest provides, the resources for most of the continent of Africa. So when you talk about deforestation, or you talk about a government of Gabon going from oil to sustainable forestry, you're actually talking about much more than one or two countries. You could start talking about continents at a time making a change. And I think the UN and even during COVID is trying to harness this incredible intention to come back better, to rebuild better. And what does that mean? So our fund, and as you know, by those on the call and others listening, 250 million is only the beginning, but it's meant to be symbolic of us putting skin in the game with investors, very much, Sean, like what you're saying, right? You get in early when no one else wants to be there. So we want to be the first ones into that solar plant, to the solar power, generation idea, the wind farm, maybe even a waste management or a coral reef fund in Fiji. We want to be the first ones in, build the foundation so that then other investors can blend in with us. And the motivation is knowing all those incredible people, all those incredible children that are being born in places that don't have the basics that my kids have, that I take for granted every day. The electricity stays on, my water is fresh and clean. As a woman, I'm equal, I'm empowered, I'm not discriminated against, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in the world that we've been reminded of during quarantine, in the world of what's happened since Memorial Day weekend in the US, I think equality really demands a reboot, and it demands that to look across so many issues. And if the UN could be a conduit for that, then we've done something useful in the investment space, right? We do a lot of good work in other things. This little fund is just meant to be somehow helpful in the investment space.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning inequality. I know that's something that we're going to talk about shortly after Arvind. Can you give us some climate tech companies in your portfolio that are, and what are the certain themes that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. And so I'll start with the themes, and I can give you a couple specific ones. The themes are more, where can you get carbon from the atmosphere into the ground, right? It's pretty simple, or into your bodies. And so that's the food supply chain. And that's, in the food supply chain, a very well-known company from IndieBio is Memphis Meats, that is making meat in the lab and growing it in a petri dish rather than harvesting it from a cow that's been raised up from a calf. But you also have plant-based options, and companies like Notco are using artificial intelligence to figure out new ways of making better tasting plant-based foods, which also lower carbon footprint. As I mentioned, as the food supply chain gets reinvented through biology, the next shoe to drop, pardon the pun, is fashion. And fashion, like, we're going to reinvent how we dress. Cotton, all of the materials that we use are also very heavy on the environment and require a lot of carbon. Remember, it just comes down to carbon, and burning that carbon, putting it back in the atmosphere doesn't help. And so what we have to do is just remove it in the first place, and then even better, draw it down. And so alongside, then after fashion, it'll continue. Biology and technology will continue to reinvent how we do everything, which will then be building materials. Mm-hmm. So There's an IndieBio company called Carbix that is taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and mixing it with minerals and then turning that carbon dioxide into stone, into cement that they could then sell. And this is the type, and of course, you know, the customer says climate friendly concrete versus climate destroying concrete. Concrete is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. That creates a new market because the social revolution of demand is starting to really pick up. So it's a virtuous cycle between the two. The problem has now reached the collective consciousness enough to drive a demand for alternatives. And so that's the framework. And it's really, truly a $100 trillion opportunity because we have to reinvent how we build everything. And so when you look at the global GDP, it's $100 trillion. And it doubles every 25 years. So between human health, reinventing human health and climate and reinventing industry for building new technologies, for building new products sustainably, it's the greatest entrepreneurial opportunity in history.
I love that. Sean, do you want to tell us next? What are some examples of climate tech companies and certain themes that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I look at it as a three-sided problem. I look at it as consumption, efficiency, and then behavior change. And you know, sometimes you create technologies like, say, the automobile, which actually, you know, increase consumption, decrease efficiency, and you know, are highly motivated by behavior change for everyone to adopt it. So it actually creates this incredibly wasteful infrastructure, et cetera. Now, in its day, it was a great thing, et cetera. Now we have to have new technologies that make shared mobility and other things that go around solving those problems. So if you can actually look at that three-sided problem and think, okay, what is going to possibly decrease consumption while increasing efficiency, while being acceptable enough as a load on people's behavior that they're willing to, you know, make that change. And, you know, that's why when Arvind talks about eliminating animal agriculture or reducing it, that is a brilliant thing because the behavior change is non-existent. You can actually produce products in these, you know, whether it's using plant-based proteins or synthetic biology or cellular agriculture or protein farming, whatever the technologies that SOSV and IndieBio and HACS are helping to develop, all of these things, you know, are easy to sort of drive those value changes in society, getting higher efficiency, you know, much less carbon emissions. Animal agriculture is like 9 times more damaging for the environment in terms of the amount of energy it takes to produce 1 calorie of meat than it would be using either plant-based protein or, as we continue to improve cellular agriculture, those technologies do. So that's a beautiful combination of those technologies. So you have to, as a venture capitalist, say, is the behavior change going to be possible? Because if it's not, you're dumb out of luck. You know, you just you can bang your head on the wall all day long, and you can't get people to accept it. Like, you know, it has always driven me crazy. And I started a company once, and it's in our SOSV portfolios. It's a great company, but it was the inventor of a whole bunch of the ride-sharing technologies. It's called Karma. The behavior change that it would have required is for people to share the car on their way down the road. It's, you know, carpooling kind of technology, but automated through phones. And Uber came along and basically did that and did it in a way which was more accessible, you know, accessible in terms of the behavior change that it required. Basically, you ordered a cab, the cab came to your door, and you're off, rather than, you know, coordinating travel in a way. So, so that's the challenge, is finding the technologies that fit the behavior change in the market. And we've backed a ton of companies that have done very well, as Arvind said, in the food sector, but also in the materials areas. where you can substitute materials that have better sustainability, like a company Alginate, which is being used by companies to replace for materials in sneakers and things like that, or Hue, which is replacing the indigo that is very damaging in terms of the market or in terms of the environment, but growing it in a sustainable manner. And also battery technology, energy technologies, companies like Volt Storage, et cetera. But loads of questions in the chat, so I should stop talking. Keep going.
So Lisa, how about you at Joint SDG Fund?
And I was just thinking a bit of the examples, especially what Arvind was just talking about. I mean, if you imagine you're talking about recreating the roads. I mean, when you talk about developing countries, you're still needing to put the infrastructure in. So imagine, instead of doing it the wrong way, the way many countries did, because cement was cement, we weren't thinking about carbon, right? We weren't thinking that way 30, 40 years ago when all these mega projects were put across North America and beyond. We can now do it the right way right from the beginning. So if you're looking at countries like Cambodia, where the biogas, the fertilizer, the compost industries are only now coming online because they're starting to see the value in that, they're going to do that in a sustainable and a green way, thanks to the Joint SDG Fund. So we're going to make sure the technology, the expertise that they need to be shown, right? The examples, probably a lot of what are in your portfolios need to be shared, which is another podcast, I think, Maya, like how do we get this kind of know-how out to the world so that it can be replicated, right? Because talk about $1 trillion. I mean, when you start looking globally at the opportunities, the idea that you're looking at an island like Fiji, which obviously relies not only on tourism, but also on its coral reef, right? You can imagine the scuba diving community, et cetera. How are we actually looking at how those ocean-facing communities are understanding sustainable fishing, sustainable development, so that they're not risking the reef by needing to take one more boatload of divers out, because that's how they're feeding their family today. So trying to really be the bridge through a loan facility, through a concessional loan, right? Through other finance mechanisms, so that they can start to create the solutions themselves. They have to own it at the country level. It has to make sense to them. It has to be their priority. But what we're seeing more and more pension funds and asset managers. I mean, I got an email today from Morgan Stanley saying, what are you doing in the Pacific? We want to know what you're doing in small island developing states. So what we're seeing at the UN is really a start of a demand. Never enough, of course, but a beginning of a demand to say, actually, we wouldn't mind expanding our portfolio in that way. And that's where I think it gets really exciting. Because again, we have this trust of our member states to give us that public money to get it started. And I think probably talking to Sean and Arvind, it's the startups, that's where the real success stories are, because you can go from 0 to 100, right? With that creativity and that spark. So that's what we're trying to do, light the spark of investment in developing countries.
And there's so many opportunity for the cross-pollination of ideas and for collaboration in the public and the private sectors, which is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, and that why we've created the Genesis Consortium, which we'll talk about later on in the conversation. And lastly, what do you see as future investment themes that should be explored further? Do you want to answer that, Arvind?
Yeah, so in terms of investment themes that need to be explored further, I can see like the entire space of accountability hasn't been created. In other words, as environmental responsibility becomes more important for S&P 500 companies, and the top companies in Japan, the top companies in all over the world, and as everyone says, okay, let's all be accountable to each other, how do we account for that? And I think there's going to be an entire class of software and technology-enabled stack that's going to be developed around accounting for the carbon and accounting for the emissions. How does Wall Street know, or how do the taxpayers know, or the investors know that people are doing what they're saying they're doing. And so I think there's going to be a new role that's created at large companies, a chief sustainability officer. And so they're going to need services to be able to do the work they need to do. And so that's an entire area, and that's on the behavior change side that Sean's talking about, right? I love Sean's framework of the three sides because, I tend to get myopic sometimes just on the technology side, but like there's these other things at play. And I think this is something that will become really big, really fast. And what are technologies that enable that? And some of that's going to incorporate biology as well. How do you have biosensors that are going to be, it's not just satellites taking pictures of fields and, oh, they're turning green or not, right? How do you have more real-time or granular data? How could there be, so that's an area I haven't actually talked about very much publicly that I think is emerging alongside, really just biology, literally continuing to reinvent every industry that we know about in terms of production.
Fantastic. And Sean, what about you? What do you see as future investment themes that should be explored further?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that's done and not being done in the area of wastefulness, period. There's like this hidden wastefulness to society that most people don't know anything about. I mean, you turn on your water faucet in your bathtub or in your house, and you have no idea about what happens before or what happens after. Honestly, how many people think about any of that? And the same is true in terms of like when people are doing, using animal agriculture as a source, they don't know how wasteful that really is in terms of the climate impact that it has. I'm reminded of the story of the first female billionaire in China, and this is a ways, quite an accomplishment because it was, I think, probably 10 years ago or more than 10 years ago. What she did is she took all of these containers that were coming from China to the US, dropping off products and going back to China empty. And her idea was, oh, okay, well, there's a lot of wasted transport in that. What if I just stuff it full of, paper, that needs to be recycled, right? And she became a billionaire just by simply using that wasted resource and then taking the product into China where they were, light on the forests or whatever, and turning it into a valuable asset. There's a tremendous amount of waste that goes on in our societies, and unless we're in the know in that field, like there's something called separation technologies, which is used in chemical areas, for producing energy, where you have to heat something up to a large amount. It separates the materials into different, funnels or receptacles, and then you cool it down, and then you heat it up again to do other processes. Many of the materials that we use in our daily lives, the products that we use in our daily lives, go through this incredible process of waste, of all that wasted heating. And there are other technologies, for example, that we're backing just to try to eliminate all of that. When you look at it, I think it's something like 12% or something. I'm making up the number, but it is between 10 and 20% of all the energy in the world is actually being used for the separation technology in this chemical and industrial process that nobody even knows is there. And so if we can, as a consumer, I mean, so if we can go after those, issues and come up with much more efficient ways, everyone will want that, right? It reduces costs for the industrial things. The products actually are cheaper, and at the same time, there's no global warming, no excess global warming happening because of the energy sources that are used to create that, coal-fired energy sources that are often used to create those separation technologies. So like those are themes that we look for. One of our companies, Mori, for example, is a company that went through our Food X Accelerator, and it just has a water-based compound that actually reduces the wastage of the food supply. Apples and bananas, etc. It actually coats the the fruit products in something which stops the degrading of the technology. You know, MIT invention, et cetera. It's really interesting, totally edible material. You know, there's nothing unusual about the thing other than the structure as to how it's built. And, you know, that's a great example of reducing waste, improving efficiencies, and not changing people's pattern of, you know, behavior. You know, they're just getting it as fresh or more fresh product with no cost benefit or no cost harm to the consumer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And what do you see as future investment themes that we should explore further at the Joint SDG Fund?
Well, I mean, I'm surrounded by sort of tech gurus. I would say we look at tech more broadly, right? Because the whole purpose that we exist is to accelerate towards the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Ending poverty, promoting education for all, ensuring everyone has access to healthcare. So in a way, we're trying to bridge innovation, which is clearly what's going on amongst the other two panelists, right? What they're leading, and technology, as we look at the targets and achieving the goals. So climate mitigation, reducing carbon emissions. I mean, what you were just saying about waste. I mean, modernizing agricultural supply chains, because of course, you know, we still are battling hunger and undernutrition and stunting in many communities. How do we enhance nutrition, right? How are we looking at better plants, transitioning crops and water and power grids all to renewables, right? Waste management, making that also into renewables. So to us, it's really trying to be, again, unlike, you know, making the new concrete, if the concrete wasn't there before, start sustainably now. Start with the first step being green, being zero waste, being inclusive, promoting equality. And I think, you know, some of the proposals we have, which we're so excited about, are hopefully going to be launching, you know, within 2 months. So we're going to have these, you know, pilot projects going out in the world showing that the UN can help make these changes. And I really think there's a synergy with Arvind and Sean. We just have to figure out how to, you know, sort of connect it. But imagine, you know, having the experts from Indonesia on this call, where they're already looking at how to use green energy or how to reduce waste, or it could just be so fascinating and mutually beneficial. So I think if the UN can use its convening power and keep networking for those colleagues, you know, who's to say where the next startup success will be? You know, it could be coming out of Jakarta as much as out of New Jersey, right? And I think that's what we're trying to show, is that there's no limit on that human innovation and energy. And so we just want to open up the doors wide and you know, and share and support at the global level.
I love that. And, you know, sometimes capitalism gets a bad rap, but how can capitalism address global inequality? This is a question for Arvind, because I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, it could be a whole podcast, could be a whole nother book. But I think the short story is really like, so capitalism and technology, one of the major drivers of capitalism, is fundamentally deflationary, right? So it lowers the cost of goods for everyone over time. But what's ended up happening, which has really changed recently, is technology has allowed fewer people to make more value, to create more value. So Facebook required far fewer people to create a $100 billion company, almost $1 trillion company now, than, let's just say 100 years ago, when you had to have a huge number of workers that were paid a lot more. And so the income distribution was very different. And so what's happened is now you have these huge haves and have-nots, because technology in other industries have driven through just the economics of lowered marginal costs to fewer people. And then those people know other people, they invest in them, and that amplification has created this rift. So, you know, capitalism, again, how does capitalism itself address inequality? Well, there's two parts to it, right? One is the income side. The other is the cost side. Real wages in the United States haven't really increased since 1975. And that's one of the reasons I think actually we're not seeing inflation. There's no actual wage increase. Printing money isn't really going to people's hands. So anyway, what we can do is we can create innovations in healthcare, which is driving a lot of that lack of real wage increase, where we lower the cost of healthcare. And so I think like that's going to be really important. And so just true innovation, capitalism-driven innovation in healthcare can address inequality through the mechanism of having more money in people's pockets every day. Non-capitalist, more policy-driven stuff, I think we could raise minimum wage in order to get that balance of economics a little bit more evened out between the capitalists, or the ones in control of equity, and the ones in control of labor. And then finally, the student debt thing is interesting. Like, we have one of the most, young people who have a higher propensity to spend and all this stuff. They're also saddled with an incredible amount of debt. And the cost of education, I think, is going to be a massive hamper on growth. And again, truly is the door of equality. Either you could get educated and therefore, have more opportunities to earn higher wages, or you don't. And now education is becoming priced out of a huge number of people in America. So how do we change that? And that could be a mixture of policy and capitalist-driven innovation. So these are some of the drivers. Like I said, it's not a thesis I just gave you, but more of a smattering of ideas. But I think that those are some of the levers you can pull.
And right now, as we look at climate change as a shared responsibility across the planet, in addressing it, why is the business model innovation piece of it so important of addressing it?
You want me to answer that, or Lisa?
Yes.
Okay.
Any one of you, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll do a very quick version of that. So I think the business models are kind of everything in the long run. And a good example of that, I think my friend Tim Chang said this. If you look at Facebook, the business model is really monetizing a person, right? To upload content, and then they use that for advertising. So what do you have to do? You have to build addiction into the product in order to make that business model work. And that's an interesting framework that I hadn't really thought about. And so business models that align free trade, along emissions, things like this are mechanisms by which we will use greed and capitalism in order to align interests and make the change we're trying to see. And so that's where, I'm over time, going from a science freak to a business model freak, because I think that's really creating the behavior change that Sean's talking about again.
Sean, do you have any thoughts on business model innovation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you look at a company like Amazon, and yes, they have some great technology, but really that is a business model innovation company, because it says that instead of buying products at retail, you cut out the retailer, you cut out the distributor, you cut out the wholesaler, you go straight to the manufacturer in many cases. And therefore you can offer products at cheaper prices to consumers directly, even though you're introducing this potentially extraordinarily inefficient, distribution mechanism in the middle. That's not necessarily a good thing for society, in that, that business process innovation doesn't necessarily drive towards less climate change. I think it probably does overall, however, because they've gotten so damn efficient that UPS truck is stopping one, on the same block, it's stopping 15 times. It's probably a lot more better off for society than people individually getting in their cars, driving 10 miles to the mall and driving back. But the other benefits are there's not strip mall, I mean, we've unfortunately in the United States, we have strip malls every 500 meters. But there will not be that need for future strip malls, and that space will become more efficient, and there will be less traffic, and one would hope. So it's a combination of that business process innovation is absolutely relentless, because you're taking what was a manufacturer's product being sold at probably 4 to 5 times the value, and you're cutting out all that middle value, and you're giving it to Amazon, and you're giving a little bit more to the manufacturer, and you're giving a little bit more of it to UPS and FedEx, et cetera. But so that's 60% of the retail value is just changing around. That is a very, very powerful business process innovation. And when we look at other business process innovations, yeah, there's real technology involved. But when you're basically, calling a cab, there was an old way of calling a cab, and there's a new way of calling a cab. The new way is Uber. But that new Uber also, gets that cab driver, the Uber driver, to to much more efficiency. So overall, it's far more efficient than the old way. You can cost less for higher quality of services. It's better than the cab industry. There's no question that's a net positive over the cab industry. But the question is, does it drive up the demand so much that it's a net positive, or do you have people in Uber driving around all day, whereas the car would normally be stuck in a garage or something? So it's a lot of these problems, it's a whack-a-mole situation, and that's okay. I think in general, technology has to be used to fight technology in so many ways, right? When we're sharing, these automobiles now, rather than everyone buying it, it's probably a net positive, right? But, the issue with climate change is we've already jumped off the cliff. And now the question is, before we go splat at the bottom of the mountainside, our job is to learn how to fly before we hit the ground. And so we're in the midst. And how do you do that? You have to use new technology. So these are unsolvable. You can't know all of the possible outcomes, but you can try to advance things in a way which is a net plus for. And that's what I think is so great, that so many people are becoming impact investors in this world, because it is driving, it's driving the thought process, and having this discussion, and having the Genesis Consortium, and having this discussion and opening it up so that more people are getting involved in backing these types of companies. I think is, it's a wonderful way of changing the discussion and adding this sort of thoughtfulness into our investing, rather than simply driving a good business model that creates chaos, and a worse off planet down the line.
Yes. Lisa, do you have any thoughts? I know you had wanted to share that the joint SDG fund is now supporting over 70 developing countries in creating a new generation of SDG financing strategies. How do they relate to climate and the financial sector? And how are you proposing to tackle the climate finance challenge?
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled that over 40% of our proposals are linked in one way or the other to green energy, to waste limitation or waste management, solar, renewables. We are basically trying to begin and create capital markets in emerging markets, so in countries where that doesn't exist yet, by starting already at green, starting already at net zero. So that's the good news, is that when you have sort of a, if you will, an open field to begin with, you can hopefully start that properly. So, don't begin the coal mine. If you have a coal resource, begin it with solar. Identify all these opportunities first. If you are building up capacity or legislation to attract creative investors like Arvind and Sean, then how do you do that, right? So part of it is the policy and legislative framework, because as you know, that's a huge piece of where you decide to do business. Many people incorporate according to certain promotions that states or countries can provide. So part of it is helping governments decipher that. It's a broad space. And then beyond that is to really identify how they want to accelerate the SDGs through climate finance. Because at the end of the day, climate is one of the 17 goals, right? But it's also ending poverty, and you can do both together. So what we're trying to show is that ending, I mean, Uber or any of the examples that we've discussed today, they have spillover effects, both positive and negative. So what we're trying to show is, being an impact investor, wanting to do good for women, you can do that probably in your local community, because you can buy local from a female-owned business, minority-owned business, for example, or we're offering an option to do that, perhaps a continent away. And climate is a piece of that puzzle, and an important one, and actually the most popular one. So by nature of us getting more investors talking to us about green, by nature of that, it will probably grow the fastest. What we want to keep saying, though, is it's also about education. It's also about the healthcare system, right? We can't only have solar farms, because then we could still have girls not going to school, right? So, she may have electricity now in the school, but she's still too poor to buy the uniform, or she's still being excluded because she's of the wrong minority group. So we as the UN look at it from a human rights-based approach, but certainly climate is a huge stepping stone for us. So thank you so much.
Yes, and climate is going to affect so many aspects of our lives, as it has, from mass migration to to conflict around the world. And we do have a lot of questions coming in from the audience and not much time left, but I will, if some of you can stay on, or we can address these questions in a blog, we could certainly do so. Lastly, I wanted to say we can't operate in a vacuum, and assuming that the rest of the world will go along with the regimen of stripped down, say, Gandhian simplicity and self-sacrifice, how do you reconcile the individual's selfish need for more with sustainability? Sean, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in terms of, behavior change. It's very difficult to try to enforce behavior change on other people. Like, we got prosperous here in the Western world before, say, India and China. And then we pigged ourselves out on animal agriculture. We love our meat. It's part of our daily diet for many people. I don't, personally. I do eat fish though. But we are, we can't really say, oh, now that we discovered it takes 4 planet Earths to support, 7 billion people eating the Western diet, and we've only got the 1, unfortunately. How are we going to, enforce that kind of change? Of course, people want more. Their economies are growing in India, in China. There's 2 billion people plus in those places versus just the 300 million, 350, 330 that we have in the United States. You're talking 7 times the impact if the behavior change isn't made and new ways aren't adopted. So I don't think, unfortunately, we have to come up with better ways of producing a high quality of life. And, ideally, we would adjust people's behaviors as well, that when we do provide them with abundant resources, that they all just still have a level of self-control that not all of us get obese and, and drive our healthcare costs out of whack and increase all these diseases like diabetes at historic rates and all the other problems that come from a unsustainable food supply. But so I don't think there's really a good answer to that question, and it's a thing that we have to continue to discover. But we have to get far more efficient than we are right now, and it's gonna, the way to make an imprint on the world is to invest in technology. And that's been a favored way for the last 30 years. If you want to make a long-lasting imprint on the world, either create a company or invest in a startup that really is trying to make that change. We're just going to keep trying to do that through SOSV and many other VCs, I think, are similarly aligned. And Lisa, it's great that the UN is actually thinking about investing in these technologies as well. I've worked with the UN as part of humanitarian operations I've done previously in a lot of places. And it's, it's a combination of government action, honestly, and private initiatives that are going to make this all possible.
Arvind and Lisa?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. I think, partnerships, by the way, are another sustainable development goal for exactly what you just said, Sean. I mean, doing this without government buy-in, it limits the scale through which a lot of innovations can be taken to benefit even more people, right? So you want the public regulation and you want the public scaling up, but you want that private innovation, which comes from a few guys in a garage or in a dorm room or in a lab in Midtown, to make that happen. So I think it is really trying to find the synergies and linking people together. And that's exactly, who we are right now as the fund. And I'm optimistic, if anything, there is an outcry, I think, that I'm hearing because of COVID, because of all the suffering, because of all the loss that seems so preventable. And now with vaccines, on the horizon, how can we make sure that we do come back stronger and more open to change for good? And I think that's my theme going into 2021, right? That we've learned from 2020, as painful as it's been, and we use that pain and that struggle and those limitations to really remind us of what we're capable of, because we do have to protect our planet and we do have to move forward for the future. So yeah, onwards and upwards for the new
Onward.
year.
Thank you. Arvind, any
Yeah.
closing remarks?
Yeah, no, I mean, amazing insights from Sean and Lisa. I don't know if I could add to them, but I mean, for me, really, it just comes down to one thing, right? You can't stop people's consumption, so you just reinvent production, and I think that's a far more productive place to spend your time than telling someone they can't have a bag of potato chips. Like, like good luck with that. And so for me, I had a behavior change startup with my wife called Starters. It was about fitness. And it's hard. It was about starting the fitness journey. I was like, I learned firsthand, man, behavior change is hard. But so, and as Sean and Lisa both said, right, these people deserve it as well, right? Like, it's not like, so that is equality. And so let's use our insights and let's use our minds to reinvent how we make everything, so we actually can have everything that humanity desires and still not wreck the one planet that we have.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all. Let's be good to this planet. And thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and most importantly, the actions that each of your funds are taking. This is around $4 billion you all have under management. I hope that gives some sense of hope to the audience out there when they're thinking about, like, what are the people at the top doing with their time? Where is their energy going? There's a lot of good people out there doing some incredible things. And so I urge you to check out Mayfield Fund, SOSV, the UN's Joint Sustainable Development Goal Fund, as well as the Genesis Consortium. We're inviting everyone to join. You can visit us at genesisconsortium.org. It's an alliance of corporations and venture funds that are committed to promoting human and planetary evolution. That includes all of us. And so far as the many questions you put into the chat box, I will compile them and put them into a blog and send them out to you all so that you do get the answers that you're seeking. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Sean.
Right.
Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Joshua.
Lisa.
All right.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.